Okay, very good. So my name is Mario Binelli. I am an assistant professor in reproductive physiology here at the Department of Animal Sciences at the University of Florida in Gainesville. And it's a pleasure to talk to this group. Appreciate the invitation by Felipe and Victor and the whole team from the task force. Hopefully we'll be able to share with you some of our newest information on Bos indicus influence in reproductive and productive traits in beef cattle. I have a co-author for these presentations. His name is Dr. Tiago Martins. Here's Tiago, dressed to war. We've been partners in research and work for many years, and most of the information that you're going to see today was organized and compiled by Tiago during his postdoctoral stage here with me at the University of Florida. So we really appreciate everything that Tiago was able to put together in a nice story and in a couple of manuscripts that I'll share with you today during the presentation. So to be able to talk about the influence of Bos indicus, we were able to use a very unique tool that, as far as I know, in the whole world is only available here at University of Florida, and that is called the multi-breed beef herd from the University of Florida. On that herd, we know the genetic makeup to every 3% of Brahman influence, and that means ranging from 0, which is purebred Angus, to 100% Brahman. And we know each individual to the 3% influence of Brahman on their genetics. For easy to manage and for easy of presenting the data today, we divided them in 6 breed groups, which have been traditionally used, and this is the way we manage the herd, which are from 0 to 19%, 21 to 34% Brahman genetics, the 38%, which is the Brangus, 41 to 59%, 63 to 78, and 81 to 100%, which is the getting very close to the purebred Brahman. The data presented today was a compilation of 31 breeding seasons. So since this herd started about 33 years ago, we've been collecting and recording individual data, and that's a compilation of 31 of these breeding seasons. So that came out to 6,503 breeding events, and they are all in the same location, which are here in Gainesville, and that's important, latitude 29.65 north, and is a humid subtropical climate. So it is one big herd with all the variation between purebred Angus and purebred Brahman, that we know the exact amount of Brahman influence on each individual, which was perpetuated for the last 30 plus years, and I'll report the last 31 years. So for today, I'll touch on 2 topics. First, the Bos indicus influence on reproductive performance, and then the Bos indicus influence in the productive performance of using this herd as a basis. For the first part, you can read all about it on this paper. It's been published last year, at the end of last year, to Journal of Animal Sciences, and that focuses on the reproductive aspects. The productive aspects it will be in another manuscripts been submitted, and it's under evaluation at this point. But I'll talk about it a little bit more further down the presentation. So first, you need to understand what is the reproductive management that this cattle undergo. So it's called a diallel crossbreeding scheme, in which the females from each of the groups, so you can see them here, 0, 19, 21, 34, 38, 41 to 59, 63 to 78, or 81 to 100% Brahman, they all undergo a estrus synchronization program. And as you can imagine, throughout this 31 years, that program changed. But since the beginning, since the inception, they have been exposed to some type of estrus synchronization program that leads to one episode of artificial insemination. So they all had a chance to get bred by AI once. And the bulls that were used for that AI, they're also from those same different breed compositions, so that we have all different combinations of cows and bulls from different genetic makeups. In general, about 2 weeks after that artificial insemination, they were put together with cleanup bulls. And again, so in each pen, you would have females from all different genetic composition, and of course, a single bull from one single genetic composition. And that went on for 6 pens. So 6 pens, each pen cows from all different groups, and only one bull or sometimes 2 bulls from the exact same genetic makeup. The breeding season was on average about 90 days. Again, it changed throughout the years from 51 days in one given year to 142 days in a different year. But on average, they were 88.4 days long, so about 90 days, which is a traditional length of breeding season for us here in Florida. So after 90 days of the breeding season, so day 0 is the day of AI. 90 days later, the cleanup bulls are removed, and about a month later, about on day 135, the final preg check was conducted. Then about 30 days after that artificial insemination, we also have one preg check. That's just to see which cows are pregnant to the AI. And then again, another final preg check after the end of the breeding season, after the removal of the bulls. So that's the basic makeup that was repeated on those 31 subsequent breeding seasons from the 90s until today. So I'm just going to have this presentation as a series of questions, because it will kind of guide our thinking throughout the presentation. So first question, does Brahman genetics influence the estrus response to a synchronization protocol? So that data doesn't have 31 years of age, because we only actually started recording estrus behavior on the last 12 years. But still, we have a good number of animals. And here's our first answer. So the probability of estrus response to synchronization protocol decreases as the Brahma proportion increases. So we have here on the x-axis the proportion of Bos indicus. So just pay attention, because that's going to be more or less the format of some of the slides I'll show. So the first bar is 0 to 19% Brahman. They're mostly Angus. The last bar, 81 to 100% Brahman. So they're mostly Brahman in their genetic composition. And here on the x-axis, on the y-axis, we imagine the estrus response to that synchronization protocol. And as we can see, for the more Angus animals, 66% showed estrus to the protocol, but only 38% showed estrus to that same protocol if they were more towards the Brahman genetics. If we put that in a regression equation, we can see that same response. So this is estrus response on the y-axis versus the proportion of Bos indicus on the x-axis, and it decreases in a linear fashion as you go from more Angus to more Brahman genetics. Now, as we study reproductive biology and reproductive physiology, and we know some of the underlying factors that could be associated with the lack of estrus response, we ask, is lower estrus response associated with a lower cyclicity at the beginning of the synchronization protocol? So we just have that answer for a single breeding season, which was recently. Tiago actually performed these exams, and he measured the proportion of females that had a corpus luteum on the day that we inserted a sitter to start the synchronization prior to AI. And what he noticed is that you can see across the top the proportion of Brahman from 0 to 100%. And actually, the proportion of females with a CL was not different according to the genetic group. So in terms of the proportion of animals cycling based on presence of CL at the beginning of the synchronization, there was not a difference. So that was probably not what explained why they did not show estrus to the protocol. Is the low, then a subsequent question, is the lower estrus response associated perhaps with a smaller size preovulatory follicle at the end of the synchronization protocol? We know the estrus response is associated with estradiol, and the amount of estradiol release is usually associated with the size of the preovulatory follicle. So now again, across the top, we have the proportion of Brahman in each of the cow groups, and the size of the largest follicle present in the ovary at the moment of seeder removal. So just at the end of the synchronization, before we started to see which ones showed estrus or not, they were different. They were affected by the proportion of Brahman, and they were larger if the animals were more on the Angus side, and they were indeed smaller if they were more on the Brahman side. And that makes sense. That is explained by a lower follicle growth by more Brahman prevalent animals due to a negative feedback of progesterone on follicular growth. So that makes sense, and that could at least help to explain a lower estrus response to the protocols, as these follicles were indeed smaller in size at the end of the synchronization. Now, of course, what we're more interested, does Brahma genetics influence the pregnancy to AI? So again, remember, they're all synchronized. They all had a chance to respond to the protocol, showed estrus, did not show estrus. The ones that showed estrus, they're usually inseminated for the AM/PM rule. The ones that do not show estrus, they are time AI, and that varied according to the protocol, but usually 72 to 84 hours after the removal of the seeder on that synchronization protocol. So again, across the top, we have the proportion of Bos indicus. And again, we do have an effect of breed in which the females, they were mostly Angus. They got pregnant about 52% to that first AI, and that remained the same for the crossbreds, but then it decreased, and lower pregnancy to AI was found on the cows that were mostly Brahman in nature. So not only they show less estrus, and associated with that lack of estrus response or a smaller estrus response, they actually got pregnant at a lower proportion compared to animals that had more of an Angus makeup. And again, if we just draw that in a regression analysis, in which you have the pregnancy by AI in the y-axis and the proportion of Bos indicus in the x-axis, we can see that the linear decrease in pregnancy to AI as the proportion of Brahma genetics increased in our animals. Now, does the Brahma genetics influence the pregnancy at the end of the breeding season? So I just put that slide back again. Remember, now we're talking about that pregnancy check that was conducted after the bulls were removed at the end of the breeding season, waited about 30 to 40 days, and did that and then performed that final preg check. And here the answer is no. There's no breed effect. So all cows, regardless of the ones that will have more of an Angus influence compared to the ones that have more of a Brahman influence, the final pregnancy rate, which is the pregnancy to AI plus the pregnancy by natural service, it was similar across the board. So there's no evidence that this cow, that the more Brahman cows were infertile or anything like that. They were all able to get pregnant, but they just did not get pregnant to that artificial insemination. By the end of the breeding season, they were all pregnant at about the same rate, 88, close to 90%. Next question, does Brahma genetics influence the interval of time needed to attain pregnancy during the breeding season? And you know, you can already suspect what's going to be the answer. If the more Angus got pregnant to the AI but not the Brahman, there might be a different distribution in the timing of when pregnancy was attained. And for that, I will share that table, which is also on that manuscript. Again, across the top, we have the proportion of Bos indicus in all animals. And then here, look at the median value. So the median value of the interval to pregnancy is the day of the breeding season in which half the animals were pregnant. So as you can see, for the more Angus influence, that was on day 0, because more than half of them were pregnant to that AI, which consisted on day 0 of the breeding season. Now, as you include more and more Brahman influence, that day becomes later and later in the breeding season. So as the mostly contrast for the group that has 81 to 100% of Brahman, it took 25 days of the breeding season to have half of the animals pregnant. So that already shows you that there is a different distribution, a different temporal dynamics on the ability of those cows to become pregnant during the breeding season. That can also be observed on this graph. That's a survival curve. So this is on the x-axis, the time to pregnancy. Day 0 is 0. Here's day 0 of the breeding season, and that's the proportion of cows that are open. So on day 0 of the breeding season, all cows are open. But then, because the ones that show heat, they get inseminated on that day, all of these cows here, they got pregnant to that AI, and then all the subsequent pregnancies occur throughout the remainder of the breeding season. So in blue, we have the more Angus animals, and we can see that 50% of them, and even more, are bred on day 0, while if you get to the red line, which are the more Brahman animals, to arrive to that 50%, we have to go all the way to 25 to 30 days of the breeding season. So then it takes longer for them to get pregnant right on the beginning of the breeding season, and then all of the groups subsequently get pregnant more and more as the breeding season continues. Then the next question is, how do the Brahman genetic effects on reproductive performance influence productivity? So you're probably already thinking about this. The more Angus showed heat more, they were inseminated more, and I just showed you that they got pregnant earlier in the breeding season compared to the more of the Brahman influenced animals. So what does that mean? If they got pregnant later, that means that they will calve later, and then because the weaning moment is fixed for everybody, you can imagine what's going to happen to the calves. Are they going to be the same weight? Are they going to be smaller? Are they going to be larger, depending on the Brahman genetics? So we measured all of that, and I'll show you in the subsequent slides. So this is the second paper. I cannot give that to you at this moment. It's been evaluated by the reviewers at the Journal of Animal Sciences. Hopefully they'll like it, and you'll be able to have that paper available to you this year. So there was, again, a compilation of data from the same herd, the same females that I just showed to you, their reproductive performance. Now we're going to see what happened to their calves after they were born. So here's the first question. Does Brahman genetics influence the calving dynamics within the calving season? So I already gave that answer, because if the attainment of pregnancy was different according to group, so there should be the temporal dynamics of calving. So here you go. Again, across the top, we have the proportion of Bos indicus in our cows from 0 to 100%. And I'm just, again, going to show you the medium. So that means, what is the day in which of the calving season that half of the calves were already born, or that the half of the dams had already calved? So day 0 is the day that the very first calf dropped from the cow. So if you take the group that has mostly Angus genetics, on day 52 of the calving season, half of the calves are already born. Now, if you go to the other extreme for the more Brahman animals, it was only on day 78 of the calving season that half of the calves were born. So yes, the dynamics of calving was shifted according to the proportion of Brahman in the herd. Does the Brahman genetics influence weaning weights? So again, you're probably already guessing. If they were born later, they'll probably have a lighter weight at weaning. And this is what we can see here: the weaning weight, the unadjusted, and the 205-day adjusted weaning weight. They were the smaller values were here for the Brahma, 231 kilos at winning weight. And then as we increase the proportion of Angus, they go to 245, 248, and 245, 247. But then look, this was a little bit unexpected, but for the purebred Angus, they were not the heaviest calves at winning. So this is a little bit of a quadratic curve in which the purebred Angus and the purebred Brahman, they're not the ones that will have the greatest winning weights, but but some of the crossbreds in between, they'll have some intermediate amount of Angus and Brahman genetics. And that's the same for the 205 adjusted. So at this point, it was interesting because it is not that Angus now in our environment is the best all the time. So actually, if you put some Brahman on that Angus, you'll get the best results in terms of winning weights, which is heterosis. All of us know about that. But the purebred Angus was not the best for winning weights in that evaluation. Does the Brahman genetics influence calf survival up to winning? So that's a different question. And now I'll show you a series of variables that are associated with what happened to animals after they are born. So does it influence calf survival up to winning? So that was measured by calving, and the proportion of cows that calved was very similar, 84, about 84, 85, 86% across the genetic groups. So what is calving? Is the proportion of cows exposed to reproduction that calved during the calving season. So calving, so cows calved, and they calved to a similar rate. Now, if you look at the proportion of stillbirths, there was no effect of breed. It is a low number. That's from less than 1 to close to 2%, according to the breeding group. Now, when you look at calf mortality, then again, we were a little bit impressed. And calf mortality, that really increased as the proportion of Brahman increased to almost a double of 9.4% calf mortality if they are for the animals that had more of a Brahman genetics, compared to 4.7% for the animals that were mostly Angus. And calf mortality was considered the proportion of calves that died between birth and weaning. So all that mortality after they were born and they were weaned. And that number was pretty significant. So then because of that, of the mortality that we accounted for, then the weaning percentage, then it became from 83% to 80% from the Angus to the other crossbreds, but it dropped to 76.5%, which was significantly lower than the purebred Angus if the animals were mostly Brahman. So the proportion of animals that weaned, proportion of cows that weaned the calf was actually smaller if the animals were with their greatest proportion of genetics in their blood. Now, the biggest question is this one here. Does Brahman genetics influence cow-calf pair productivity? So what does it mean by productivity? Productivity is a measure of the amount of kilograms of calf weaned per cow that was exposed to reproduction. And here what we see is that again, the lowest number, the lowest productivity was for the more heavy Brahman genetics animals, 182 kilos, and then it increased for the crossbreds. But then again, at the Angus extreme, the animals with the least proportion of Brahman, it was not the maximum. So the maximum productivity was not at, of course, at either of the extremes, not the Angus, not the Brahman, but the crossbreds in between. So that was also interesting. So again, although some of the reproductive responses, they were linear towards the Angus, from the lower on the Brahman and the greatest on the Angus, for some of the productivity responses, that was not so. Again, it was a little bit more on that quadratic shape in which the animals that had the greatest performance were the ones in the middle. So again, productivity is the kilograms of calf weaned per cow exposed to reproduction, adjusted for the weaning rate and for the age of the calf at weaning. So then we took some of these, so we, of course, we are big fans of Brahman here in Florida for use as a crossbred. And we look at some of this information and we try to see how do we compare with similar data from different production systems, but again, using Bos indicus cattle. So I was talking today with Manuel Filho, and he's a manager of large accounts of Alta Genetics in Brazil. And he directed me to data from benchmarking, from a benchmarking tool from Integra. And here's the website if anybody's interested on that information. And that's for operations 637 ranches, about 2 million head of cattle, 2 million plus head of cattle in just in a given year, in one year, that 21-22 breeding and calving season. They are mostly in the lower, which is Bos indicus. So it'd be like similar to our Brahman, and they are mostly in the Brazilian tropics. So it's different from Florida. We are here in the subtropics, they are in the tropics. And the indicators that will show you, they're presented in 3 categories. I'm going to show you the average of all ranges that they collect data from. Then I'll show the data from the average of the top 30% most lucrative ranches. And that profit was calculated in dollars per acre. So the 30% that gave you that gave them the most money per area, they're considered the average top lucrative herds. And then as a third column, the average of the 30% top ranches with the best performance for a given indicator. So it didn't care for the money, didn't care for the economics. The one that had the best numbers, the 30% that had the best numbers, how did they perform? So that I'll call the average top performance. Let's how did our herd compare to that large data set from Brazil? So on that table here, I'll have the indicators here on the left column, and then across the top, I have our cattle, our UF Brahman cattle from that multi-breed herd. Then the average, the top lucrative, and the top performance. Remember, top lucrative, the 30% that gave more money per acre. Top performance, the 30% of the herds that were the most that give the best numbers. So when we look at the pregnancy at the end of the breeding season, our UF Brahman 88%, and that was pretty similar to the top performing herds from that lower database in Brazil. We're pretty similar there. Regarding the weaning weights, I took an average of males and females, and then I calculated the average of males and females from that Nelore herd. And again, the Brahma cattle that we are weaning here, they are very similar in terms of performance of the top performing Nelore herds back in Brazil. So again, we're doing good. On the calf mortality was the most striking differences. So as we are here at 9.4%, and then their average is 3.6, and the top performers only had a 1.5% calf mortality. So that's something that again probably needs some research on our end to see what can we get better in terms of calf mortality. In terms of the weaning rates, the amount of calves that were weaned divided by the total number of females that were exposed to reproduction. Again, pretty similar, 76.5, and their best herds, 78.3. So not that different. We're doing pretty good. And the productivity, that variable that we are very interested. So for every cow that were exposed to reproduction, what was the amount of the kilograms of calf that she was that on average she was able to leave for us to make money? So 182 kilos in our herd here, and 181 kilos in their top performing herds back in Brazil. So again, we're not doing too bad, even taking in consideration that compared to the crossbreds and compared to the pure Angus, there was a lower performance. So in conclusion, Felipe Muriel told me they'll have to be like a 30-minute talk so we have time for questions. So I'm already at the conclusions. So see if you can follow my rationale at this point. The greater Brahman genetics equals to less estrus to the protocol, that equal to less pregnancy by AI, and also that's associated with a longer gestation. So the more Brahman, I didn't show you the data, if you're interested, I can share with you, the more Brahman will also have a longer gestation. So less estrus, less pregnancy to AI, longer gestation, that takes to less early calving or more late calving, and that will lead to lower weaning weights. They were born later, they are lighter at the moment of weaning. Then on the productivity side, the greater Brahman genetics also had greater calf mortality, and that takes to taking in consideration it resulted in a lower weaning rate, so less animals weaning, less females weaning a calf. Sorry, and the lower weaning weights that translated into lower productivity. Excuse me. However, it's important to see that the effect of the Brahman genetics on weaning weight and on productivity was quadratic, indicating that a positive effect of outbreeding Angus with Brahman. Now, please notice that we have to be very careful. Excuse me. This is a gator-centric view, and I mean gator-centric. Excuse me, because all of this data was generated here in Gainesville, Florida. Would be great if we'd be able to replicate that herd across the country on different latitudes or on different climate pools, but no, we only had this here in Gainesville. So I'm giving you what we were able to observe throughout a long time, but for our conditions. I think that it's fair to expect is that as we move from that Gainesville latitude more to the north, more Brahman's probably going to get worse. And as we move south from that latitude, from Gainesville, more Angus is probably worse. We don't know exactly what are the tipping points for, what is the best Angus Brahman combination according to your latitude or climate change. I don't even know if that line should be a straight line or if it should have some kind of a slope to it to accommodate more, for example, more dry conditions to the west. But that's a thought of, what is the Brahman influence and how it changes according to the latitude and to the climate in which it was measured. Again, I give you a glimpse of what it looks like here at our humid subtropical climate of Gainesville. With that, I'd like to recognize everybody from the lab. Again, here is Tiago playing the mushroom at Super Mario Bros. And everybody that works so hard in many of our experiments. And then a whole bunch of other people and sponsors, producers, county agents, farm managers, other faculty, and the support we have from federal agencies and from companies for different aspects of doing reproductive management that we do here in our range and with our collaborating ranges. So with that, I will open for questions and really appreciate your attention. Thank you.
Excellent, Mario. Really appreciate the talk. You mentioned early on, and that herd is amazing, right? The ability, the possibilities that it generates by having that herd is pretty amazing. I have a question, and so those cattle are managed together as a single group, or within the genetic groups are they, managed differently?
So they're managed together as a single group. What we do will have those 6 pens. Each pen will have cows from all breeding groups, but it will have 1 bull or 2 bulls, depending on how many females at that time from a single genetic group. So then we'll know exactly the composition of each of the calves that will come from each of those pens. But they are all on the same environment, the same range, receiving the same kind of attention, and rotating among pastures as well. So
Sure.
everything we can do to keep the environmental variables controlled, we do.
And so what about like synchronization protocols? Are you guys doing the same synchronization protocol of all the cattle, or is it different based on the genetic makeup?
So it is the exactly same synchronization protocol. Again, it has changed over time, but it's kept the same for all breeding groups. So what we are using now is the 7-day CIDR co-sync. So generate CIDR for 7 days, 1 injection of prostaglandin, then we observe heats for 72, sometimes a little bit more, and inseminate using the AM/PM rule. And then the ones that do not show heat, they receive a injection of GnRH, and then they are time AI.
Okay.
And the semen that it's used is again on that same schedule to meet the requirement of the breeding groups that they have. It is kind of complicated.
Yeah, no.
But we have it down, I think.
Yeah, no, there was a question about
Yes.
the timing of insemination. So you guys will heat check, breed based on heats within 12 hours after heat, and then do the fixed time AI.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, there's a question about that.
And I have I almost added the slide, but I didn't add it. Our pregnancy rate, our pregnancy per AI for the animals that are bred based on heat, it's on the upper 60%, and then that's overall for all breeding groups. And for the ones that are time AI, just because they were not observed in heat and we bred them anyway, it's on the it's about 25%. So it's a lot less.
There's a question about how you guys, I guess, dealing with the male effect. I'm assuming, for example, have to use different sires, right, within that herd. How are you guys accounting for that on some of those data, and if you are accounting for that?
Yeah, we account for that adding bulls in the model. So bull goes in the model for each of these variables that we have calculated. That's the way we do it.
There's a couple questions about the calf mortality, right? That's pretty striking. Can you elaborate a little bit more where you think that's coming from? There's some questions of, is it predator, or is it, what do you think it's happening there?
Well, so I'm here for the last 5 years, and I've heard many stories. At some point, there was lots of emphasis on trying to identify killing by predators. My impression is that the conclusion of that story it was never that striking. It was never really proved that there were so many animals that so many calves that were predated, and that could account for that large number. I know that in our herd here in Gainesville, I've never heard about any mortality, at least in recent years, associated with predation. Maybe more on the south, more like more larger extension rangeland. Maybe that's more common, but again, it's never going to account for all of that large number. One thing, Victor, that we have been observing, we do have another herd. It's a purebred Brahman herd. I didn't show any data from that herd. That herd has a slightly shifted breeding season, and the reason we did it is because when those calves when the calving was occurring like a dead in the middle of winter, like in January and February, we'd have a lot of calves that would not respond. They were paralyzed by the cold weather. And, this is cold weather for Gainesville, which is, on the 30s and 40s, or even warmer. But that's enough to kind of steal the energy from those calves, and they just wouldn't nurse. And man, it took a lot of effort from our manager to take one by one, warm them up, and then try to get them to the dam. And some of those just would not survive. So, but that's for the purebred Brahman herd. So the Brahma, the purebred Brahma, they are really sensitive to cold. And our multi-breed herd, they still will calve together a little bit earlier, but they start already in November. So we'll have some cool nights, again, 40s, and that might be one possible explanation. But it's striking. It's way up there.
Yeah.
And again, when you contrast with the Brazilian data on the tropics, which is warm all the time, it's so low. 3% as the average, 3.5%. So we are 3 times greater than that. It's really striking.
So you didn't mention, there's a question here, so I'm going to ask for you to explore a little bit more about the gestation length and those differences in between the Bos Indicus and Bos Taros.
Yeah, so let me just have that data right here. I had it as a slide. So I'm just going to read some of the numbers for the group that's 0 to 19% Angus, so Brahman, so mostly Angus. The average gestation was 282 days. I'm just going to go all the way to the other end of the spectrum. So for the animals that were 81 to 100% Brahman, the gestation length was 290 days and a half. So that's 8 days more, 8 days less for the calf to grow. And that calf was already born later. So that doesn't help.
Yeah, exactly.
with that winning weight. So 290 days average, that's across categories, primary, secondary pairs, and mature cows. Across the board, if you average them, 290 days.
You mentioned now that the parity, is there an effect of parity? I guess a different effect of parity based on the breed categories?
Yes. So I didn't want to go into that side because I wanted to stay more on the Brahman genetics. But sure. That paper, if you read it, you see analysis were done based on generic group and also based on the parity. So you're gonna have all the information there. I can't recall everything on top of my mind. We can there'll be another nice seminar.
Exactly.
But yes, it is observed, and of course the most productive are the multi-pairs cows that we should expect, and the least productive, most of the cases, are the prima pairs. So not the virgin heifers, but after they have their first calf, they'll have a drop in their production, and then they'll catch up again next year, as expected.
Do you have data on longevity of those cows based on the breed?
No. That's a good point. That's a good point.
Yeah, it's a good question that we have here.
Yeah, no, we don't. That's a great question, because there'll be like another paper like on lifetime productivity. There'll be actually, and we do have the information to calculate that. It's just not very easy. It's you can imagine the sizes of these spreadsheets, and a lot of them from the old times, they were still by hand. It had to be typed in. It was a lot of time just curating this data to put that information together. But I'm pretty sure that we will be able to calculate that at this point.
There's a question about pregnancy loss, and if there's something that you guys are exploring on within that herd.
I don't think so. For that, maybe based on the calving dates, would be able to know a cow that was pregnant by AI, but then the date of parturition was later than expected, that there'll be a indication of pregnancy loss. But other than that, we are not. There's no PEG test like a PEG one or one of those tests for mortality, no, or ISGs. We're not doing any of that with this herd.
Yeah, and I'll make a comment here. It was not done with that herd. When I was in Florida as a grad student, right? There's one of the studies that we did with Cliff Lamb, looking at pregnancy loss between Angus and Brangus, right? Using some of that, I guess some of the cows from this herd up in Mariana, and that the data shows a pretty significant difference whenever you add Angus genetics, right, between either the recipient, this is embryo transfer, either the recipient or the breed of the embryo, they'll have more losses, they'll have more pregnancy loss. So that's something that we're looking at. So, you know, which is interesting, right? Like you show that they have, I guess, you know, less fertility, but they have less loss, it seems like, right? So it's pretty interesting. More data to come too on that. This is something that we've been trying to figure it out as well. So there's a question about, you know, the marbling, and, you know, we know as we increase Bos indicus genetics, we decrease intramuscular fat and marbling. So considering that and how beef is sold in this country, right, and the focus on meat quality, and do you think there is a place for Bos indicus genetics in the U.S. and can they compete?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So within the Brahma project, everything we do with Brahma here, there's a group of researchers, and the leader at this point is Dr. Raluca Matiska. She's a geneticist, and that's one of the topics she's looking at. Also, Dr. Tracy Scheffler, she's also a meat scientist, and we use that same beef multi-breed herd to slaughter a number of steers every year, and then measure what is the Brahman influence on meat quality. So just going to the Brahman side, I think that their answer would be, there is variation. That's what is important. So on average, yes, it's more tender and more marbled if you go to the Angus side, but within the Brahman variation, there are individuals that will have a very soft meat and with sufficient marbling to score well. So, you know, again, it will be a matter of understanding those markers and taking that into a selection program, and then giving priority to that kind of meat quality. So it's there. It is not that, you know, if you're a Brahma, you're tough. That is not a given for all the animals. And at the same time, there are Angus animals that were tough and they were not well marbled. So there's variation in both sides. Again, on the average, you see that the Angus is better quality, but there will be individuals on the Brahman side that will taste very good. And they also have, I'm not sure if every year, but they also have tasting panels that will also help with that conclusion. Not just the shear force and the marbling evaluation, but tasting, it will taste not different from a good Angus.
Exactly. Yeah, there's a question. I guess it goes on that same direction, talking about heterosis, right? And I kind of, the way I see it, Bos indicus being used is like, you know, exploring the heterosis, right, and breeding, you know, with Bos Taros type breeds. Are you aware of any data that show, as we breed Bos indicus, Bos Taros, so think about a Brangus or a Brayford type animal, on the latitude that we has, where we can go, where are the limits, I guess, where we can see some differences and start seeing some negative effects, I guess.
Yeah, no, I don't know.
That's, I don't know either. That's a good question.
That's a very good question. I have a he's not a producer. He's the manager of one of the largest ranches here in Florida. It's called the Likes Brothers, and they are south of us. And he says, I like to have as much Brahman as I can. And it took me a while to understand that. I actually asked him a couple of times, what do you mean by that? So you as you go south and you getting more towards the tropics, that curve that I mentioned to you for some of the variables, you will get more inflected, and your Angus is going to start to perform very poorly. So the more Brahman you have, at least in your cow herd, it's gonna benefit the survival and the productivity. So again, depending on the environment, you can afford, you must have Brahman in your composition, perhaps in more and more of a proportion. Yeah, as you know, Victor, in Brazil, what they're trying to do is to have the Nelore or the Bos indicus as the maternal base. So those are the moms. Those are the dams, because they are excellent. They are excellent moms. But then it's gonna be of a less value if you breed them to an Nelore bull. So they'll breed them to an Angus bull, and those half bloods, they'll have excellent market value in Brazil, but they'll have more than 2 inches of hump. So here they'll be considered eared cattle.
Yeah.
So depending on the market, what's required is a lot different.
Exactly. And I don't recall if you shared that or not, but do you have data on puberty achievement on heifers, on those different groups, genetic groups?
No, I did not. I don't have that at this point. I don't have that summarized by breed group. We have a large extension program here in Florida, the Know Your Heifer program. And most of the cattle, we don't do any purebred Brahmans. So most of the cattle are Bos indicus influenced, but we don't know the exact composition, Bos indicus proportion on each of the animals. We have about, in that program, again, it was mostly spearheaded by Tiago Martins. We have about 5,000 animals on 3 years of evaluation, and we have 2/3 of these animals to be reproductive tract score 4 and 5 prior to the beginning of the breeding season. So 2/3 are mature as they are getting ready to start the breeding season. 1/3, they're still immature. That's overall. There's no genetic classification, but just as an overall view for Brahman influenced cattle, they'll be mostly Brangus in our environment, from Gainesville down to the south. You go all the way to Lake Okeechobee and much closer to the tropic line, but that's the number that we have. So it's not bad. It's pretty good.
Yeah. I guess going back to some of my earlier comment and questions, and there's 2 questions here. They're related to the protocol, right? The task force has a protocol for Bos indicus animals, right? And so do you think that this lower fertility to timed AI could be related to the protocol? And is this something you guys are considering, since the protocol that you guys have used seems to be the Bos Taros type protocol?
Yes. So now they published this paper, we started to move things around a little bit. So starting last year, for heifers, we shifted completely to long heifer protocols with MGA. I think we did a 14-day seeder as well, but so they have the 14-day exposure to MGA, and then hopefully they'll have a cycle, and then we'll breed them on the next cycle. So it's a 33-day protocol to give them greater exposure to that fluctuation of progesterone that benefits their achievement of puberty. So that's for heifers. And this year, for the first time, we also switched our protocols for cows to the 7 and 7 protocol. So again, giving them a little bit more exposure to progesterone into all the advantages of that protocol. Start with that prostaglandin injection, so the ones that are cycling will drop their progesterone. So we don't have, actually we do have the pregnancy rates. I just cannot recall very well, but I know that your estrus response was excellent to that protocol. We were very impressive. Everybody was very impressive. Our pregnancy rates, I don't know if they increased, but they did not decrease. They did not go down. So they're either we maintain them or increase them. I should have those numbers with me. I don't. Next time. So we did change protocols. Yes.
Yeah. No.
And again,
yeah.
but we are one step behind in which we are not doing time AI. Okay, we are breeding based on estrus at this point.
A last question here, Mario, and then we're gonna wrap it up for the sake of time. But can you, I guess, share some of your thoughts as whether, as we increase some of the Brahman influenced cattle and think about moving more towards the Midwest and maybe raising that Brahman line a little bit higher, do you think they will adapt well to grasses, to environment, or do you think that they need to be down south?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure if there'll be an advantage of going north with them, because the things that they are good at, that's the resistance to parasites, to endoparasites, then their resistance to heat stress, they will not be as harmed by that as more north you go. Of course, I know it's hot in Michigan in the summer, but it's not something that will really affect their productive life. So I'm not sure if there'll be an advantage to take them north, because we know that the Bacilli, and I just showed today, it will have a negative effect on reproduction. The heifers, they achieve puberty later, and then the cows, although it was not the case that I showed today, but usually they take a little longer to cycle. I said I didn't show today because at least the proportion of CL was not different. But that could be the second or third CL on the more Angus group, while just the first CL on the Brahman. We don't know, but we do know that they will take they'll have a longer anestrus period before they start cycling back. So if you don't have whatever characteristics are that they benefit, why should we take them there? So I don't see an advantage at this point. I might be wrong.
Perfect. Mario, thank you again. Excellent talk, excellent questions. We part of why we do this is the ability to do Q&A, and we have a group of people that ask a lot of questions, and we really enjoy this, and appreciate you presenting all your data and your work at Florida. And
Can I make one more point? There's one more point that I think is very important to make.
Sure.
Which is this paper, this work is kind of like, hey, but everybody knows that. Everybody knows, but nobody's tested it. Nobody's measured. So on this paper we measured. You know exactly what it is. At least for Gainesville, what is the Brahman influence? You might say, yeah, we know that. I don't know, more Angus or the Brangus, they perform better. Yeah, but what is the amount? How much can you go? How much Brahman can you go? How much Angus can you go and affect or do not affect your variable? So that's measured for the first time. So we really love this paper. Please read it and cite it, because this is unique. It's not that, oh, I already knew it. Yeah, but nobody's tested it. There are some papers that, for example, compare a Holstein with a Nelore, for example, but you don't have everything in between. You don't have the half bloods. You don't have the continuum on genetics. So this is the beauty of that paper.
Yeah.
Just wanted to make that final point. Should have made it before.
No, perfect. That's perfect. Again, Mario, thank you for spending your Tuesday night with us.
That's
I
great.
appreciate everybody's presence here. Remind that this was recorded. We're going to be posting this in the next couple of days after we do some editing on our YouTube channel. So if you missed part of it, if you want to share this with somebody that has not been able to watch and should watch this presentation, so please share them the YouTube channel with them. Again, thank you for our sponsors. Without them, we cannot do this without, charging people, right? We do it for free because we were able to secure sponsorship from our sponsors like Astrotech, Reprologics, BI, Merck, Elanco, and the Texas A&M Pregnancy and Developmental Programming. So thank you again, and we'll see you guys in a couple of weeks on our last webinar of the year for the spring session. So thanks again. Thank you, Mario. And have a good night, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks so much.